Welcome to a radical discussion of independence, free will, liberty, and the left-hand path. This is Daimonosophy with your host, Paul Frederick.
Welcome, friends and fellow Daemons, to Daimonosophy. Tonight, my guest is Douglas Lucas. Douglas has run a record label called Arcana Machine, where he released works by artists like Kenneth Anger and Zeph. Douglas also does a musical project called DamageSignal and has a new release out called Hammer or Nail. Douglas, how's it going?
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. No, I'm happy to have you on. We started communicating a little while back, and I got to check out some of your music and check out some of your online presence, and it's all very, very dark and inspiring, and appeal to my bizarre taste in such things. So,
fantastic.
Your musical project is DamageSignal. So, tell us what's it all about?
Yeah. Well, DamageSignal was born in 2017 when I was living in New York City. I used to ride around on the subway planning the DamageSignal invasion. I felt a need for such a project in my own life, as well as in the realm of experimental and occult art, to express certain ideas and aesthetics, and it's pretty much an amalgamation of everything that I'm interested in and had been for years, really up to that point. Things I've been reading, different, philosophical ideas, experimental music, performance art, all that stuff. So it kind of came out of that, and it started with performance. It's each performance is a multi-sensory ritual. It's a kind of an onslaught of sound, infrasound, video, gesture, and it's all meant to stimulate the conscious and the unconscious mind to bring about harmonic revelations in the mind of each individual person who experiences it. And performances happen only on specific days, like solstices, equinoxes, and other significant times. And there's also other activities that aren't open to the public that happen at various times throughout the year, but the public performances are pretty spread out. And it's kind of hard to explain. It's meant to be really experienced more than necessarily discussed in a way that really you get the whole picture. So on the website, there's some pictures of the performances. You can kind of get an idea of what it looks like, but there's no actual recordings of the performances, video or audio, because it's really meant to be experienced in person. And I've kind of went to great lengths to kind of keep stuff off the internet if I can, just to kind of keep it in that realm, which, there's not a lot of, it's hard to do that now, everything is online. So, but yeah, that's kind of it in a gist, I guess.
So how long, you mentioned it's hard nowadays. So how long have you been doing music? Have you been doing this since, prior to the internet explosion?
Yeah, I started playing drums when I was 6 years old, and from there I played guitar and started playing in punk bands and rock and roll bands, and then got involved in experimental music and some improvisation stuff, and kind of branched out. And I went all the way to doing harsh noise to field recordings and all in between. So I've been doing music for as long as I can remember, really, and in one way or another. And but yeah, the whole internet sensation has really changed a lot of stuff, and made it a little more difficult to kind of have anything surprising. You know, when people show up at a show, they've either already heard the music and they know exactly what it sounds like, or pretty much what it sounds like, you know, and it's you kind of lost that that, you know, thing of going to a show and kind of being surprised by what's there.
Oh yeah. No,
which is unfortunate, I think.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, when I was a kid, I started going to punk rock shows and stuff in the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah.
We just went to shows. You didn't know what it was going to be, and you just go to the show and you just have your mind blown by it. And nowadays, people go to see exactly what they want to see, and they don't want to see anything. You know, they have high expectations for it to be what they expected, and there's no surprise. All of the mystery, you know, is being sucked out of it, and I think that's probably a really huge, like, cultural thing going on with humanity right now. As a result of, you know, social media and the internet and everything. There's no mystery left. Yeah.
I mean, you know what people are having for lunch, and, you know, all kinds of things that I personally don't want to know, and I really don't know who would want to know, you know. But yeah, so keeping a little mystery involved, and you know, I think the other part of that is keeping it to where, you know, I feel like that this project is really, you're not going to get it unless you're there, you know, because there's just the whole way that it's set up, and the whole intention behind it is that you're supposed to be standing right there in front of it, you know. So I try to keep it that way for now anyway. We'll see what happens later, but
well, there's definitely a lot of mystery looking at your website, and we'll put the link for your website up on the show notes page for this, so people can check it out. But so for those who haven't seen it, there's this image on here of a figure in black robes, very satanic looking, standing behind what looks like a large altar, and on either side there's banners, and it looks to me like of the Elhatz rune. Am I correct on that?
Yeah.
And it's like right side up on one side and upside down on the other. What does that mean? What's the significance of that?
Those are essentially the runes of life and death, and they correspond to what's going on stage, in the sense that basically there's two sides and two forces coming together throughout the whole performance. That's what's being symbolized all over the stage, and those are just kind of those two runes kind of take that to kind of the farthest extreme. You know, life and death are the two most opposing forces, yet they're one and the same as well.
And then you also have the whip and the rope. Is that a similar thing, kind of the contrast?
Yeah. The whip, you know, represents one polar opposite of the rope, and they're coming together there in the shape of the Ingwaz rune, which is also known as the Earth rune and the rune of harmony. And so it's the putting together of the two forces, you know, the union of opposites. And that's essentially what the kind of idea is behind the project, in a way, is that it's really complex and kind of goes in a lot of directions, but essentially it's, you know, bringing together these two opposing forces, and kind of, I think that most people fall into one category or the other, and that could be a sliding scale as well. Some could be farther left or farther right, but ultimately I think that everybody has their place in that, and that it's all part of the, you know, the union of everything. And I think that realizing where you stand on either side of that, and employing that in your life, and is really important to happiness, and just you know, keeping a good order and balance in everything.
So I think this is an idea you find, and I don't know if this is intentional for you, but one of Anton LaVey's theories, kind of the basis of his personality theory, is that everyone is either, in essence, everyone is either a sadist or a masochist, to some extreme, like you were describing, to some extreme or the other.
Yeah.
And that, and
I
that
definitely
and that they need
think
each
that's
other.
true.
Right, these two types need each other, and it's kind of the basis for interaction.
Absolutely. There's definitely some elements of even BDSM culture that play into the whole damage signal apparatus. And my feelings on that is that I feel like that that BDSM is reflects nature in a way. It reflects personalities, and it's kind of a very, erotic and very displayed way of doing it, but that it's reflecting core values of not only the people involved, but I think of everyone that is in existence.
Yeah. So what does the name, let's talk about the name damage signal. Like how does that tie into it?
Well, originally I was calling it D/S, capital D, lowercase s, and that's a BDSM term actually for dominant and submissive. And I was working with a project before that was called Damages, which was basically a noise project that I was doing and I'd done a couple radio shows where I'd been kind of like an artist in residence, and I kind of was doing like soundscapes live on air and live mixing and stuff like that. And one of those that I did, I called Damage Signal, and it just kind of fit with the name, and I felt like it represented what I was trying to do with the project as well, which is kind of send out this signal that kind of damages maybe ideas about the way we think the world is and the way that it actually is, and kind of replace that with an awakening on that. So it just kind of fell into place naturally. But originally it was just called DS.
And so then from what you described to me there, you're not a nihilist with this. This music is not like nihilism. Like you have this idea that breaking things down in order to create something better.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've done music in the past where it was kind of just, I would consider it really nihilist, where it was just meant to be, there was no meaning at all. It was just meant to create a presence, through volume and through putting different types of sounds together. But yeah, with this project and really with all the art that I'm involved in now, I really do have an intention that I want to get across. And sometimes I'm not even sure what that is. It's kind of like if I can break down a wall, then I don't know what's behind that wall, but that's really up to the person who experiences it. But, my job is just kind of to break down the wall and let them see what's there.
Yeah. Now you're doing them a favor.
Right. That's how I see it too.
So how would you describe the music to someone who's never heard it? How would you mentioned noise earlier in your previous experience. Do you consider this damage signal to be noise, or is it experimental? How would you describe it?
Well, I don't even think of it as music. I think of it as just sonic, just sonics put together to kind of achieve a certain goal. But there's definitely sounds that are recognizable in there. There's sounds of a record and a turntable, birds, guitars, drums. There's male and female voices, and volume itself is actually used as an instrument. I try to really have it as loud as possible to kind of shake the person to the core, and let these in order to achieve these results. But I mean, if you heard it, you would probably say it's, fits into the experimental realm. But I don't really think about it as music. I think about it more as like, okay, these two elements, represent this, or kind of have this this idea behind them.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. So let's talk about the album. Let's talk about Hammer or Nail.
Sure.
What is that? How does that fit in with it? What is the aim of Hammer or Nail?
Well, I mentioned originally this project started as performance, and as it developed and as the ideas behind it developed, I've started branching out and trying to incorporate the same ideas into new mediums and into different ways of, getting into people's experiences. So one way that was obviously recorded sound. So what's on Hammer or Nail, it's a 7-inch lathe cut that was put out by Human Hood Recordings, and it's basically a sonic meditation that consists of a rhythm on a single drum that I came up with, and then on top of that there's a voice track that is meant to be almost like a chant, have the same kind of effect, but it's manipulated and works in a way that is meant to hit on a conscious and unconscious level. And so again, it's not really, I don't really consider it music. I consider it more of a meditation. And then Wellsong Partridge did the artwork. He did a really great front and back cover for it, which I think really amplifies the whole thing even more.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. And it's a 7-inch, and it's and people can buy it from you direct by going to your website.
I'm actually sold out, and the last I heard, I think there's definitely. The last I heard, I think there's actually just one copy of the 7-inch left from the label, but you can buy it digitally as well. If you go to the Human Hood Recordings Bandcamp, which I think is humanhoodrecordings.bandcamp.com, you can buy the 7 inches there if it's still there, and then the digital track is there too.
Okay. Excellent. So we talked a little bit, you mentioned runes, and you mentioned harmonic revelations and some fairly deep esoteric stuff. What is the role of the occult or esotericism in your work? Do you have a background with those sorts of things?
Well, I first became interested in the occult through the art of Austin Osman Spare. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not. I figured you probably were, but for anyone who's not, he was a 20th century English artist and occultist, and he used art techniques like automatic drawing and things like that as magical mediums. There was really no separation between his practice as a magician and his practice as an artist, and so I got interested in that type of stuff through him, and that kind of led me down a road where I encountered people like Peter J. Karl and some of the chaos magicians, and of course got into Aleister Crowley and more ceremonial magic kind of stuff. But all of that really was just, I feel like was kind of leading up to when I discovered Anton LaVey and read the Satanic Bible. That's kind of when everything came full circle. I just felt like that I felt a resonance there that I hadn't felt with any of the other people or text or anything that I'd encountered. And what I really liked about Anton LaVey and the Satanic Bible is, first of all, as a philosophy, I really connected with it. And secondly, there is the whole ceremonial greater magic part of the book, but then he talks a lot about lesser magic, which is which I think is a really important element that's not discussed as much, or at least in as much detail in some of the other occult traditions out there. So I really found a lot of resonance there. But yeah, and I feel like with this project, definitely there's some influence from that, and as far as aesthetically, I mean, the whole presentation of the ritual chamber in Anton LaVey's living room in the Church of Satan during the 60s, I was just really knocked out by that the first time I saw it, So I think kind of cultivating that same type of presence is something that I'm interested in on stage to kind of present and project onto an audience. But where was I going with that, dude? Is that answering your question?
Oh, sounds great. No, I completely. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, or I can resonate with your experience. I think when I discovered the Satanic Bible, and I'd been on a process of exploring the occult and looking for different things and trying to find out the truth behind things and trying to find out how I could have power in my life, because I was a teenager and I didn't have enough power, I felt, over my destiny.
Yeah.
And LaVey, I think that book was the first one that I read that started telling you in no uncertain terms that really magic is something within you, right? That magic is not something floating out there that you need to, you need to find a special formula or word to unlock it. No, it's something within yourself that comes from the individual, and that ceremony and all these other things that we do are just ways of getting at that, ways of kind of helping you draw that out. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that he was one of the most important occultists ever, and he just happened to come along, in the 1960s in America. And but yeah, no, I feel the same way. I feel like that, and I feel like going back to lesser magic, I feel like that's something that, I mean, there's definitely something to be said for, having a ritual chamber and performing ceremonial magic. I mean, it's definitely a powerful, useful tool, but the everyday application of lesser magic is really, I feel like, more, in certain ways, more far-reaching, or at least in a compatible way to greater magic. To be able to, it's the living magic, all the time, and incorporating it in different ways. So I think that's really important. But as I kind of, that there's definitely an influence there from that kind of thinking, and also people like Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, and Karl Jung, the people like that have certainly influenced this project and some of the ideas behind it as well.
Well, that's interesting. So tell me about Heraclitus. How does Heraclitus fit into your formula?
Well, I got I don't even remember how I first encountered his work, but I remember I was reading through the fragments, of his writings, and there's stuff in there like from all things one, and from one all things. He says in there, I think there's a part where he says God is day and night, winter and summer, war and peace. So it's it's this union of opposites, and kind of going back to this idea that everything has a place and a role, and that should be embraced totally and not denied. And I think that's something that in the modern culture that we see a lot, is I think a lot of people are trying to be things that they're not, and that they're pushed and encouraged to be things that they're not, and that they can't ever be. And I think that that they're going into careers and ways of life that don't suit them at all, and that it caused them to be unhappy and cause a lot of unnecessary problems. Whereas if they were to embrace their essential being and, live like their nature tells them to do, then they would be happier and the world would be more in balance and in order. As a matter of fact, Heraclitus, I know there's a quote where he says, opposition brings concord, out of discord comes the fairest harmony. So I think that pretty much, sums it up. But yeah, he just has these great one-liners, in the fragments of his writings that are just, I think, really far-reaching,
I'm gonna have to check that out. I've not read much Heraclitus in the past, but that sounds like some.
Yeah, he's great.
So you also talk about, in line with magic and occultism, you also talk about sonic sigils. Can you cue us in on that?
Sure. Well, the first, I guess, magical practice that I ever tried myself was sigil magic, and which goes back to Austin Spare and his influence on chaos magic and stuff like that. And so I, and for people that don't know what a sigil is, most of your listeners probably do, but it's basically a symbol of desire that's meant to produce those desired effects. And the sigil is, like you were saying, it's internalized, and it's really this interesting interplay because it comes from within, but then it becomes something external, but then you kind of work with it again inside yourself and then put it out. It's like the psychological process, right? But I started using sigils, and I found out that they really work. That they were a technique that for me was very successful. And as I mentioned before, I've been involved with music or sound in one way or another ever since I can remember. So I wanted to incorporate something really sound specific into my practice. And so it made sense to me to try to incorporate sound as a sigil instead of the classic, kind of illustration glyph type of sigil. So basically it's the technique that I came up with is, and I'm certainly not the first person to ever use sound as, as a sigil, but it's basically just an expansion of the visual sigil techniques that were developed by Austin Osman Spare and other magicians. But essentially, you write your desire, such as something like this is, this my will to publish a grimoire, and you would remove all the vowels and repeated consonants from that sentence and write the remaining letters in a different order. And then this is where it kind of gets a little different than the traditional technique. So you would combine them by recording yourself reading or pronouncing the letters in order to make a sound symbol. And that's just one way of doing that. You can be creative with it. For instance, you could draw a sigil and then record the sound of a pen tracing it, and that could be your recording of the sigil. But anyway, you manipulate the recording into a different, simpler sound until it sounds, really magical to you. You can use editing software to add effects to change the sound or the pitch or the speed of the recording. And then, forget the desire. And then you would charge that in a similar way that you would charge a regular sigil. You just listen to it deeply in a state of altered consciousness, which could be brought about by orgasm or meditation or whatever. And, close your eyes, visualize whatever your technique is for kind of sending that sigil out there, into the cosmos. And so that's basically it. But I wrote a small text about this, and it's really kind of bare bones, just kind of giving you the technique, and then you can take it and do with whatever you want to do with it. But that, that's a very basic description of a sigil. I would definitely research more before doing it to prepare properly. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just kind of, instead of making a glyph, you make a sound and you work with that sound and make a recorded sigil out of sound instead of drawing.
Yeah. No, I love the idea. I'm 100% on the same page. So I wrote a book a little while back called Daimonosophy, and I have a very brief chapter in there about aural sigilization, which is basically the same thing. Yeah, basically the same thing. And it's like, it's one of these things that, when you discover sigils, because I went through this process also of, discovering Peter J. Carroll, and, oh, wow, Austin Ocean Despair and all this. And then you discover sigils, and then one of the next thing you realize is that, oh, wow, sigils are all around us already. You go back and look at, the goetic stuff, and you're like, oh, wow, those are really sigils. And then you look at the McDonald's logo, and you're like,
McDonald's,
wow,
I was going to
really
say, yeah.
Sigil.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with music, it's the same way, especially modern music, which is all about in short little quips, right? Like music used to be like, getting away from classical and stuff like that. As music evolved, now music is just sent out in these like really short blasts. Pop songs are like, 3 minutes, and the magic in it is always pretty, mundane, I guess, by our standards. But when you realize as a musician, you can do the same thing with your music, it can be
absolutely.
It can totally add a whole new dimension to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It really makes the creative process much more in depth and much more fun.
And something I had not even thought about. I thought about this listening to you talk about it. How the standard formula for creating a sigil is you write out the statement of intent, and then you go through and you start taking away things from it, right? You go through and you start striking out, taking away letters out of it, and then start reforming it. And it just made me recollect for a moment that my musical process is more a matter of, we just record and throw down just a bunch of stuff. Then the process of mixing is always a matter of taking stuff out. You spend more time in post-production taking stuff out, removing things, pulling things out of it, compacting it down, and then
manipulating it, Yeah, it's interesting, the parallel there for sure. Yeah, and maybe that's where this idea kind of popped into my mind, is doing this kind of thing with music for years, and then kind of, I've never thought about that, but maybe there's a connection there, because it does make sense.
And, it's similar because, the ability for people to use sigils and start sigilizing on their own, you could make the case that, oh, well, this appears maybe in the, in the Renaissance or sometime when those grimoires like start to appear. And that has to do with the technology and the general education of the population got to a point where people had means to do such things and to take control of such things. Sure. And our technology nowadays has kind of got to the point where people can start doing that now with music and with video, really. I mean, that's probably one thing about the modern era that we have, maybe a good thing that we have about the internet, is that people can use it in that way to create, sonic sigils, on a new level that never would have been possible in the past. For years, I was pretty strict analog everything, recording on tape if possible, and all kinds of stuff. And I still really like that process, and I really get into kind of the limitations of that process and what, it kind of forces you to create new ways of doing things. But there's also something to be said for the
the endless possibilities of, modern technology, especially with something like this, and with music in general. You can really take things to a level that you just can't with more limited means. So it's interesting, because it's really the only limit is your imagination. You can take this stuff as far as you want to go and make it whatever you want to make it. And like you said, it's easy access too. You don't have to rent a studio for, $500 a day. You can do this, at home on your computer.
Oh yeah. No, it used to be impossible. Even as recently as like in the 80s, or the 90s, it was like impossible for just one person to create things that quickly and efficiently. You had to pay money. You had to pay money to someone to go into a studio and set it up in advance, and it's just.
Oh yeah.
Very,
yeah,
very
definitely.
different.
I've had my times doing that. It's and you. It's like if that's all then that's what and that's what you do. But once you start, doing stuff yourself, you realize you just have the capacity to take it more, just to experiment more, to try different ideas and see what works, see what doesn't, and kind of come out with the best of all possible worlds, which is great.
Yeah. Now, speaking of all of these things, let's talk about the label that you did, Arcana Machine, where you had some stuff by Kenneth Anger and Zeph.
Yeah. That was a project that I did in 2017 as well, actually. And it was a label exploring esoteric influences and practices via sound and musicians and artists. And it's currently inactive. It was really planned to be a short-lived project to release a few recordings by select artists, and some of those happened and some of those didn't happen. But anyway, the first release was by a project by Kenneth Anger and Brian Butler called Technicolor-skull. And it's basically a collaboration with Kenneth Anger on theremin, and Brian Butler is on guitar and electronics. And it started as a live project. They did some shows, and it's really, really great to see live. It's basically them doing their thing, and then behind they have the kind of this collection of different scenes from some of Anger's films projected in like a montage kind of way. But the release is called Mark 6, and it was their second album that they did. I think the first one came out in 2011. And it was basically it's 20 minutes of them doing like this just heavy sonic ritual kind of thing. And then side B is that in reverse. So the whole tape is kind of, it's on cassette. So the whole thing is kind of like a loop. And it's an edition of 666 copies. So that was the first release. The second release was by Vanessa-sinclair-carl-abrahamsson. Vanessa, they're actually married. They both live in Sweden now. But at the time they were not married. But Vanessa she's an artist and a psychoanalyst who explores the cut-up method that was popularized by William Burroughs. She explores that as art and magic. And then Karl is a Swedish artist. He has a really rich history of art and music making on the international cultural scene. He was closely involved with Anton LaVey and people like Genesis P-Orridge and people like that. Definitely, there's so much there that I couldn't really go into detail, but definitely worth checking out. But anyway, they were the second release. It was their debut album as a duo, and it basically consists of Vanessa and Karl reading some of her cut-up text set to a background of music that was created by Karl, which is basically these kind of electronic soundscapes, which are really great. And then the final release was by Zev. It was an album called Four Quarters, and it was basically 4 sound pieces based on the 4 cardinal directions. And it ended up being his final album. He passed away about a month after it came out. So but it's a great release as well.
And when was that then?
That was 2017.
2017. Okay, so that's very recent.
Yeah.
So the Zeph thing is interesting with all this coming up, because that was a big synchronicity for me, because when I had Boyd Rice on the show, he mentioned Zeph, and I was like, yeah, Zeph. I haven't heard that name in years, and I actually have an old record that I got years ago, like in the 80s. I found it in a used section, kind of when I was just discovering Throbbing Gristle and all of these things. And it was it's a split album. It's from the Berlin Atonal Festival. And one side is a very early incarnation of Psychic TV, where they're doing a live version of the song Unclean. Wow. And the other side of the CD was Zeph, or the album. It's a record album. It's Zeph, just like, drumming on metal objects for 20 minutes. And I'd never heard anything like that before. I'd never heard anyone put out an album of a guy just drumming on metal things, for like an hour.
Yeah.
So that was and then it's a really interesting synchronicity. Then I discovered your stuff and looked at this, and I heard that Zeph had passed away recently, and that kind of blew my mind.
Yeah. It's interesting how all that comes together. Yeah, he was an amazing person and an amazing musician. I mean, he was a poet as well. He wrote poetry, and he was just an innovator. I mean, and like you said, these totally non-traditional percussive sounds. He would just, put all this stuff together. And I know he mentioned that he used to go out to, junkyards and find just different pieces of metal and different different things, and bring them back and put them together and make these new instruments. And I mean, he was really a pioneer of industrial music as well. I think he's really known in some circles, and then there's some people who've never heard of his stuff, and so I think he was never really given the credit that he was really due. But he's really fantastic. The pieces on the Four Quarters release, there's definitely percussion there, but he also took some field recordings that he'd made in I think he said some of these went back to the 80s, and so he weaved them in with these percussive sounds and kind of made these 4 10-minute pieces that are just really great. But it kind of shows his talent as putting stuff together too, as kind of composing, is what I was really knocked out by the release.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate everything that I've ever seen by his. And so that release, all of these that we've been talking about from your label, these are all on SoundCloud now, correct?
There's teasers on the SoundCloud.
Okay.
This goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, I really tried to keep these off the internet. They're not available digitally. They're only available on cassette. So what's on SoundCloud is basically like a minute or so of each piece on the record, to see if you like it. You can buy it and hear it. But yeah, those are all of them are still available. I'm not doing the mail order since the label's not active anymore, but I do have them on Discogs for sale if anyone's interested in checking them out. But you can preview them there on the website by going to the SoundCloud.
Okay, awesome. And you did a show recently with Temple of Saturn, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was around this time last year, actually, in New York. We did a show together. Yeah, she was. I'd never met Joan before that gig, but she was really great. She's really great artist.
No, she's great. Yeah, Joan Pope is awesome. She's very cool. You had her on the show before. I really appreciate her stuff.
Yeah. I checked out the video that you sent me that she did for your projects. Really great, man. I really dug that.
Oh yeah. No, she can do that. What do you want to call that? Stroboscopic effect that kind of makes you feel like maybe you're being hypnotized or something. And
yeah.
Pretty good stuff.
Yeah, it's
and
real,
that was in New York.
Kind of
so you used to live in New York, right? You used to live in New York, but
yeah.
You don't now?
I don't.
Where
no.
are you at now?
Well, I left New York in 2018, and since then I've been living in an undisclosed location.
Okay, gotcha.
I've been traveling more than I ever have in my life, and so I'm really going different places and doing different things, collaborating with various people and performing and stuff. So, but my home base is just kind of a place where I can go and be isolated.
Right. No, I can definitely appreciate that. Well, all right. So any final words for us? What do you think about the state of the world right now? Are we in the Kali Yuga or the final days of the
Absolutely.
apocalypse? Is there any chance?
Yeah.
Is there any hope at all for mankind?
Well, I'm trying to do my part to restore some things that need to be restored. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if we're in the final days or if it's already happened and we're living in the aftermath.
Yeah.
But it's a sad state of affairs for sure.
Yeah. I don't know either, but I'm like, as long as I'm here, I'm gonna fight. I'm gonna try and fight for.
Yeah.
Fight the
I
good
mean,
fight,
I'm having fun, so that's where I'm at these days.
Awesome. Well, I think all of the stuff that you're doing is definitely on point, and I hope you keep fighting the good fight.
Hammer or nail.
Keep us in the loop.
Well.
Let us know how things are going, and
hammer or nail, all is well.
Yeah. Well,
hammer or nail,
thanks so much for having me on. You've had some really
hammer or
guests,
nail,
and
all is well.
Like I mentioned before, I checked out your website.
Hammer or nail,
I thought it was really,
all is well.
Really great. So keep up the great work.
Hammer or nail, all is well.
you as well, my brother.
All is well.
Thank you.
Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nail, all is well. All is well. Hammer or nails, all is well. In your room, all is well. Hammer or nails, all is well. In your room, all is well. Hammer or nails, all is well. In your room, all is well. Hammer or nails, all is well. In your room, all is well. Hammer or nails, all is well. In your room, all is well. Hammer or nails, knows that all is